Hi, Guy. Tonight we are traveling back in time, leaving our world behind for the misty shores of ancient Japan. Picture this. You're standing on a cliff, the wind whipping salt spray into your face. Below, the sea churns, a restless gray monster crashing against the rocks. And perched right here, on the edge of the world, is a wooden temple, its ancient timbers groaning with every gust, smelling of incense and sea-dampened pine. A lord's triumphant return from war creates a stir at this very temple. For a clever fisherman named Tommy, this is a golden opportunity. But his deceitful plans put him on a collision course with a humble bell ringer, threatening his entire livelihood. Forget learning to use a katana. In this world, you probably won't survive the rampant illness or a bad batch of fermented soybeans. If you're getting cozy and ready for our journey, feel free to let the algorithm know by tapping that like button and subscribe for more trips to the past. I'd love to know where and what time you're listening from, so drop a comment below. It's always amazing to see where these stories land. All right, get comfortable. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A Fisherman's Tale begins. You are Tomitsuchiya, and the scent of your product precedes you. You trudge through the bustling seaside market, the wooden slats of your cart groaning under the weight of your prized dried squid. They hang from bamboo poles like strange, leathery banners, their salty, fishy perfume a siren call to hungry villagers and passing merchants. You grin, your teeth a flash of white in your sun-weathered face. Business is good. You're outgoing, you're kind, and you know how to spin a yarn better than any fisherman on this coast. The squid you just sold to that portly merchant? You told him it was wrestled from the arms of a territorial octopus deity. A little white lie never hurt anyone, right? It just makes the meal taste more divine. The air is a thick soup of smells and sounds. The tangy punch of pickled ginger from the stall next door, the earthy aroma of drying mushrooms, the sweet smoke of roasting chestnuts, all layered over the constant briny breath of the ocean. Shouts of vendors, the haggling of customers, the laughter of children chasing stray dogs. It's the daily music of your life. You adjust a string of squid, making sure its most appealing side is facing the crowd, when a change ripples through the market. It starts not as a sound, but as a silence. The chaotic symphony of the market fades, the haggling stops mid-sentence, the laughter dies in the children's throats. A hush falls, heavy and immediate. People shuffle to the sides of the dusty thoroughfare, their heads bowing, eyes cast to the ground. You feel the vibration through the soles of your straw sandals before you hear the cause. The rhythmic clop of hooves on stone, the steady, metallic jingle of armor. You crane your neck, and there, at the far end of the market, the procession appears. Banners bearing a stark, unfamiliar crest flutter in the sea breeze. At its head rides the lord, Honda Tadakatsu. Even from a distance, he is an imposing figure. His armor, a dark lacquered steel, seems to drink the sunlight, though it's dinted and scarred from recent battles. His helmet is famous, adorned with real deer antlers, making him look like a fearsome forest spirit. His face, visible beneath the helm, is a mask of exhaustion, etched with the grim lines of war. You can see the scars, pale white against his tanned skin, telling their own silent stories. The crowd parts like the sea before a great ship. The air, just moments ago filled with the scent of spices and fish, now carries the metallic tang of sweat-soaked steel and worn leather. This isn't the pomp of a festival. It's the grave return of men who have seen the other side of life and brought its ghosts back with them. You watch them, these warriors, their faces stoic, their movements economical, and you think, he must be absolutely boiling in that tin can. It's like a personal portable sauna for angry men. But as Honda Tadakatsu draws nearer, your amusement fades, replaced by a familiar calculating spark. While others see a savior or a conqueror, you see something else. You see opportunity. The entire procession isn't stopping here. They are heading for the winding stone path that snakes up the cliffside, towards the temple that watches the sea. The temple where the quiet, unassuming bell ringer, Nobu Nakagawa, performs his duties with such humble piety. The great lord passes your stall. For a fleeting second, his weary gaze sweeps over the market, over the bowed heads, over your strings of dried squid. His eyes hold the vast, empty loneliness of the battlefield. Then he has passed. The column of his soldiers following in his wake, their dusty footsteps silent on the now hushed ground. The procession slowly begins its ascent to the cliff temple, a dark river of men flowing toward a sacred place. The market remains frozen for a moment longer, then, slowly, the chatter returns, though it's more subdued now, colored by the gravity of what it has just witnessed. But you are no longer paying attention. Your mind is already up that cliff, inside that temple, a clever, deceitful plan beginning to form, as slick and slippery as the creatures you pull from the sea. You don't even bother packing up your cart. Old man Suzuki from the mushroom stall owes you a favor, and you call it in with a sharp whistle and a jerk of your head. He ambles over, grumbling good-naturedly, and you clap him on the shoulder, promising him the pick of your next catch. With your livelihood in capable enough hands, you turn and join the tail end of the stream of people heading for the cliff path. You are not a pious man, but you know a rising tide when you see one, and Lord Honda's return is a tsunami of opportunity. The path is exactly as you remember it from your childhood. A cruel, winding staircase carved into the very face of the cliff. The stones are worn smooth and concave by centuries of pilgrims' sandals and monks' bare feet, and they are slick with sea mist. You grip the thick, knotted rope that serves as a handrail, your knuckles white. To your left, the cliff face rises, dotted with hardy, wind-stunted pines clinging to impossible footholds. To your right, there is nothing but air and a dizzying drop to the sea. The waves below are a churning cauldron of white foam and dark, menacing green. They boom and hiss, a constant, thunderous breath that seems to shake the very rock you stand on. The sound is immense, primal. It's the sound of a god clearing its throat, and you have to raise your voice to speak to the person in front of you, not that you bother. You're saving your breath for the climb. As you ascend, the air changes. The fishy, earthy smells of the market are scoured away by a wind that is cleaner, sharper, carrying only the pure scent of salt and the faint, resinous perfume of the cliffside pines. You can taste the salt on your lips. Gulls wheel and cry overhead, their calls thin and lonely against the roar of the surf. You pass small, weather-beaten shrines nestled in alcoves in the rock, offerings of dried flowers and small, carved fish left to appease the spirits of the air and water. You, of course, have never left an offering. The spirits can catch their own fish. Finally, you reach the top. The temple stands there, not in defiance of the elements, but in partnership with them. It seems to have grown from the cliff itself. Its dark, unpainted timbers are bleached gray by sun and salt, and the tiled roof, once a brilliant blue, is now a mottled tapestry of moss and lichen. The entire structure groans and creaks with each powerful gust of wind, a sound like an old man settling into his bones. It doesn't seem fragile, but ancient, enduring. It has witnessed countless storms, a silent observer perched on the edge of the world. The air here is thick with the smell of wet wood, cold stone, and the sweet, calming aroma of burning incense that spills from its open doors. It's a place of profound peace, a stark contrast to the churning ambition in your heart. You slip past the guards at the entrance. They are more focused on keeping the crowd organized than on inspecting individuals, and step into the temple's main hall. The change is immediate. The roar of the sea is muted to a distant rhythmic murmur, and the wild light of the coast is tamed by the hall's deep shadows. The interior is vast and cavernous, the high ceiling lost in darkness. Giant wooden pillars, each carved from a single massive tree, hold up the roof. The air is cool and still. Dozens of flickering oil lamps and candles cast a warm, dancing glow on the faces of kneeling samurai. Their dented armor is off, placed neatly beside them, and they are clad in simple underkimonos. Their faces are grim, their prayers silent and intense. These are not men celebrating a victory. They are men giving thanks for their survival, and perhaps asking forgiveness for the things they had to do to achieve it. Your eyes scan the hall, past the rows of warriors, past the main altar with its serene, golden Buddha. You're looking for a familiar face, and then you see him. In a recessed alcove to the side, away from the main congregation, is a small workspace illuminated by a single, bright lamp. There, hunched over a stone mortar, is your cousin, Honda Tadakatsu. Not the Lord, of course. That would be too convenient. This is the other Honda, the one who chose herbs over swords, healing over killing. His brow is furrowed in concentration, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he grinds a mixture of roots and leaves into a pungent paste. The sharp, medicinal scent cuts through the incense. He is surrounded by organized chaos, bowls of dried herbs, rolls of clean bandages, and small ceramic pots filled with salves and powders. He must feel your gaze, because he pauses, pestle held midair, and looks up. His eyes find yours across the shadowed hall. For a long moment, you just look at each other. There are no words, but a whole conversation passes between you. Your glance says, "Cousin, look at this." The whole province is celebrating. There's money to be made, glory to be had. Help me. Asterix. His look is far more complicated. There is the deep, weary sadness of a man who has spent the last week stitching up the very real costs of the Lord's glorious victory. There is exasperation, a flicker of the old annoyance he always felt at your schemes. Kami, not here. This is a house of gods and grieving men. Do not bring your marketplace tricks into this sacred space. Asterisk. But beneath it all, there is a flicker of something else. The begrudging, unbreakable bond of blood. He gives a short, almost imperceptible shake of his head before turning back to his mortar. But the message is clear. Be careful. You give a slight, confident nod he doesn't see, as if you've just secured his cooperation. You are about to move deeper into the temple, your mind already calculating the next step in your plan, when a soft voice speaks from the shadows beside you. The sea is loud today, fisherman-san. It sings a song of deep currents and hidden rocks. Quote, you turn. Standing there is Nobu Nakagawa, the temple's bell ringer. You've seen him around, a quiet man who seems more like a ghost than a person. He is slight of build, dressed in the simple gray robes of a lay attendant, and his hands are clasped before him. He is the definition of humble, almost seeming to apologize for the space he occupies. Yet, when you meet his eyes, you see they are not vacant or servile. They are clear, deep, and unnervingly perceptive. They seem to look right through your easy smile and see the cogs of your deceitful plan turning within. Nobu-san, you say, your voice booming a little too loudly in the hallowed quiet. You dial it back, leaning in with a conspiratorial grin. It sings a song of celebration! A great victory for our Lord, good for the province, good for business. You give him a wink. Nobu does not return the smile. His expression remains one of serene, solemn politeness. A victory is like a great wave, he says, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cuts through the air with the clarity of a striking bell. It looks magnificent from the shore, but it can hide a powerful and dangerous undertow. Many things can be dragged out to sea and lost forever in such a tide. You feel a prickle of annoyance. This quiet little man is raining on your parade. That's a bit grim, isn't it? The men are home. The war is won. We should be drinking sake, not speaking in riddles. Forgive me, Nobu says, bowing his head slightly. I am a simple man. I only know what the temple knows. And the temple hears many whispers on the wind. He lifts his head, and his eyes hold yours again. This time there is an unmistakable warning in them. There are rumors, fisherman-san. Dark rumors that cling to this victory like seaweed to a drowning man. They say the price of this battle was not paid in coin or steel, but in something far more precious. They say the enemy's castle did not fall to samurai skill, but to a shadow, a sickness, a poison that did not distinguish between soldier and civilian. He lets the words hang in the air between you, heavy and cold. A poison. Your mind races. A feat of arms is one thing, but victory by such dishonorable means that changes everything. It makes the Lord's procession seem less like a triumph and more like the fleeing of a crime scene. These are dangerous words to be whispering in a Lord's shadow, bell ringer, you say, your voice low and hard. The truth is often dangerous, Nobu replies, his tact unwavering. I only offer a caution. You are a man who looks for opportunities in the currents of life. Be wary that this current does not pull you down into depths from which you cannot return. Some tales are best left untold, and some victories are best left uncelebrated. He gives you another small, formal bow. The evening bell will soon need ringing. I must prepare. A pleasant evening to you, Tuchiya-san. And with that, he melts back into the shadows from which he came, leaving you standing alone. The scent of incense suddenly seems cloying, The distant prayers of the samurai sound like murmurs of ghosts, and the confident, brilliant plan you walked in with now seems like a very, very bad idea. The weight of Nobu's words settles upon you, cold and heavy as a stone from the bottom of the sea. You stand frozen for a long moment, Nobu's words echoing the deep, resonant boom of the sea below. The air in the temple suddenly feels thin, hard to breathe. The plan that had seemed so brilliant, a masterpiece of marketplace cunning, now feels like a flimsy fishing net you foolishly cast into a maelstrom. You came here to tell a tale, to spin a lie for profit. But what if the truth Nobu spoke of is a far more dangerous story? You look around at the kneeling samurai, at their bowed heads and grim faces. Were they praying for victory or for absolution? The distinction suddenly felt terrifyingly important. As dusk bleeds into night, the temple undergoes a transformation. The solemnity of the afternoon's prayers dissolves under a tide of sake and relief. Attendants move through the halls, lighting dozens of paper lanterns that hang from the rafters like captive moons. They cast a soft golden glow, painting the stern faces of warriors in warm, forgiving light and throwing long, dancing shadows that writhe on the ancient wooden walls like living things. The oppressive quiet is replaced by the lively, twanging notes of a biwa and the reedy, mournful call of a shakuhachi flute. The music weaves through the rising chatter and laughter of the soldiers, who have shed their stoicism along with their armor. The air, once heavy with incense and prayer, now thickens with the smells of roasting fish, steamed rice, and the sweet, potent aroma of poured sake. A festival, a celebration of life wrested from the jaws of death. You find yourself with a small ceramic cup of sake in your hand, the raw spirit warming your belly but doing little to calm the chill that has settled deep in your bones. You are a part of the crowd, nodding and smiling when you need to, but your mind is a churning sea. Your outgoing nature is a mask you wear with practiced ease, a bright costume for the grim play unfolding in your thoughts. You watch the men. They boast, they drink, they tell stories of the battle, they speak of breached walls, of fierce duels, of the enemy's shocking lack of resistance in the final days. They praise the Lord's brilliant strategy that brought the war to such a swift, decisive end. Your cousin, the other Honda Tadakatsu, is still at his station, though his work has slowed. A few of the more seriously wounded soldiers sit near him, their bandages starkly white in the lantern light. He cleans his instruments, his movements precise and economical. Every so often, his eyes find yours across the hall, and his expression is a clear, silent plea. Don't do it, Tommy. Leave it be. Asterix. But the fisherman in you, the part that knows you must cast your net when the tide is right, cannot resist. This is the moment. The men are drunk, their minds softened by relief and wine. The Lord himself sits on a raised platform near the main altar, observing his men with a detached, weary expression. He is listening. You drift through the crowd, your movements casual, until you find yourself near a cluster of high-ranking samurai. They are louder than the others, their armor more ornate, their laughter more forced. One of them, a bear of a man with a scarred face and a booming voice, is holding court, and their gait was splintered like firewood. He bellows, slamming his fist on a low table and sloshing sake. But it was the days before that were the strangest. They fought like demons for a month, then suddenly nothing. It was as if their spirits had evaporated. By the time we went over the walls, they were weak as kittens. Many were already sick, clutching their bellies. A god must have smiled on our Lord and cursed them. Quote. The others roar their approval, raising their cups. To Lord Honda and the gods who favor him. Quote. This is your opening. You take a step closer, a thoughtful, almost sad expression on your face. You let out a heavy sigh, just loud enough to be heard over their boisterousness. The scarred samurai turns his bloodshot eyes on you. What's the matter, fisherman? Is our victory not to your liking? Oh no, Master Samurai, you say, bowing your head respectfully. Your voice is not your usual boisterous market cry, but something more somber, more storyteller-like. It is a great victory. It's just... Your tale reminded me of a strange and sorrowful thing I saw once in my own trade. Quote, Curiosity is a hook, and you've just said it. The men quiet down, turning to you. Even in their drunkenness, A new story is a welcome distraction. We fishermen know the currents of the sea, you begin, your eyes distant, as if you are looking back into the past. But sometimes the sea itself falls ill. I remember a small cove, north of here, the best fishing on the coast. Then, one spring, the strangest thing happened. From the shore, the water looked beautiful, clear and blue, but when we cast our nets, we brought them up empty. Day after day. We finally sent a diver down, a brave boy. He came up, his face pale as a ghost. He said it was a graveyard. Every fish, every crab, every strand of seaweed on the bottom was dead, as if the life had been silently stolen from the water. You pause, letting the image settle. The samurai are silent now, their drunken mirth forgotten. Your cousin has stopped cleaning his tools and is watching you, his face a mask of dread. The strangest part, you continue, your voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, was what the old women in the village said caused it. They spoke of a wind that had blown from the mainland just before. A wind that carried a fine, sweet-smelling dust. A dust that settled on the water and looked like pollen, but it was no pollen. It was a poison from a bitter root, they said. Colorless, odorless in the water. It didn't kill in a storm of fury. It crept in silently, stole the strength from the inside, and left behind only the illusion of life. Quote, "You let the final words hang in the air. You haven't mentioned the war, or the castle, or the lord. You have accused no one. You have only told a fisherman's tale. A simple anecdote. But in the charged atmosphere of the temple, surrounded by men who had just witnessed something unnervingly similar, your story is no longer just a story. It's a mirror." The scarred samurai stares at you, his mouth slightly agape. Another, younger warrior looks nervously at his comrades, then down into his sake cup, as if searching for an answer there. The seed is planted. The whisper has begun. Then you feel it. A change in the air. A sudden, intense pressure. The music has not stopped. The chatter from other parts of the hall has not ceased, but the space around you has become deathly still. It's a silence that emanates from one place. The raised platform, where Lord Honda Tadakatsu sits. Slowly you dare to lift your eyes. The Lord has not moved. He still sits in the same relaxed posture, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding his sake cup, but the hand holding the cup is no longer relaxed. His knuckles are white, straining against the smooth ceramic. His face, which had been a mask of weary detachment, is now utterly devoid of expression. It is a terrifying blankness, more menacing than any snarl of rage. His eyes, which had been sweeping over his celebrating men, are now fixed. They are not looking at the samurai you were talking to. They are looking directly at you. It is not a look of anger or surprise. It is a look of cold, absolute recognition. It is the look a hawk gives a mouse just before it dives. An assessment of threat, a calculation of force. In that single chilling gaze, he sees you. Not Tommy the smiling fisherman, not Tommy the teller of tall tales, but Tommy the man who knows. He sees the gears turning behind your eyes. He sees the cleverness. He sees the deceit. He sees the danger you represent. The noise of the festival fades to a distant buzz in your ears, replaced by the pounding of your own heart. The air feels thick as seawater, and you are drowning in his gaze. The moment stretches, an eternity in a few heartbeats. Then, with a control that is more frightening than any outburst, he breaks the stare. He lifts the sake cup to his lips with a perfectly steady hand and takes a slow, deliberate sip. He sets the cup down with a soft, definitive click. The sound cuts through your fear like a razor. He has heard. He knows. And he has made a decision. A wave of panic, cold and sickening, washes over you. You have miscalculated. You thought you were casting a net into a pool of drunken soldiers, but you have cast it at the feet of a dragon and tugged on the line. You snap back to the present, forcing a broad, foolish grin onto your face. But it's just a silly story to frighten children. You say, your voice a little too high, a little too loud. You drain your own sake cup in one gulp, the liquor burning a trail down your throat. "Forgive an old fisherman his gloomy tales. A toast to the victory." You raise your empty cup, your eyes darting around at the samurai. They stare back at you, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. The spell is broken, but the mood is shattered. The scarred warrior grunts, turning away from you and back to his companions, but the boisterous energy is gone. You have brought a ghost to their feast, and it now sits among them. You need to leave. Now. You offer a clumsy, hurried bow to the samurai and begin backing away, trying to melt back into the crowd. Your eyes sweep the hall one last time. You see your cousin, Tadakatsu the healer, slowly shaking his head, his face etched with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. And across the hall, standing in the deep shadows by the entrance, you see him, Nobu Nakagawa, the bell ringer. He hasn't moved. He is just watching you, his humble posture unchanged, but his perceptive eyes hold no triumph, only a profound pity. He had warned you about the undertow, and now you feel its inexorable pull, dragging you out into a dark and dangerous sea. The Festival of Lanterns suddenly feels like a festival of shadows, and you are the one who is being hunted. Your feet move before your mind does, carrying you backward, away from the circle of suddenly sober samurai. You need air. You need the wild, clean scent of the sea to scour the cloying smells of sake and fear from your lungs. The festive hall, which minutes ago felt like a golden opportunity, now feels like a cage, its lantern light a web, and you the fly caught squarely in its center. Every laugh sounds like an accusation, every note from the flute like a funeral dirge. You feel the Lord's gaze on your back like a physical brand, a mark that singles you out from the herd. You stumble through the thinning crowd, mumbling apologies as you jostle celebrating soldiers. They are oblivious, lost in their cups and their relief. To them, you are just a clumsy fisherman, an inconsequential part of the scenery. But you know better. You have stepped out of the scenery and onto the stage, and the play's most powerful actor has just noticed you. You are no longer invisible. That, you realize with a gut-wrenching certainty, is a fatal condition in the presence of a man like Lord Honda. Your desperate path takes you toward the main entrance, toward the deep, comforting darkness of the night outside. And it is there, framed by the massive timber posts of the temple gate, that you see him again, Nobu Nakagawa. He has not moved from his post in the shadows, a silent observer of the night's events. He is still just a silhouette against the lantern glow spilling from the hall, a humble man in simple robes. As your eyes meet his across the crowded space, you expect to see smugness and "I told you so" look for your foolishness. You see neither. Instead, as you draw closer, you see him straighten from his slight, apologetic stoop. It is a small movement, but deliberate. He brings his hands together, not in their usual clasp of humility, but with his fingertips pressed together in a gesture of profound respect. Then, he gives you a slow, deep bow. It is not the perfunctory bow of an attendant to a guest, but the solemn bow of one man acknowledging the courage, however reckless, of another. His eyes, when they rise to meet yours again, are filled with an unnerving mixture of awe and deep, sorrowful concern. It is a look that says, "You have spoken a truth that needed to be spoken, and I honor you for it." But it also says, "By all the gods, what have you done to yourself?" Asterisk. In his quiet, tactful way, he has validated your action while simultaneously confirming your deepest fears. You have not just provoked a warlord. You have broken a sacred, unspoken rule. And he, the temple's keeper of rhythms and secrets, is now bearing witness to the terrible consequences that must follow. He gives one more infinitesimal nod, a final, silent communication, before turning and disappearing soundlessly into the deeper shadows surrounding the great bronze bell, his duty calling him away from the drama of men. You burst out of the hall and onto the wide wooden veranda that skirts the cliff edge. The shock of the cold, salt-laden wind is a physical blow, and you gasp, leaning heavily against a thick wooden pillar. The roar of the sea is immense out here, a physical presence that drowns out the noise of the festival behind you. Below, in the churning darkness, the waves crash against the rocks in explosions of white foam, their rhythmic boom a constant, thunderous heartbeat. The moon is a sliver of bone, casting a weak silvery light on the restless water. The world feels raw, elemental, and utterly indifferent to your small human panic. You are just a man on a cliff, and the sea and the sky and the Lord in the temple are all forces far greater than you. You close your eyes, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. The fisherman's tale. What a fool you are. You, the master of the little white lie, the spinner of yarns about octopus deities, decided to tell a story that was true. And the truth, you now understand, is a far more dangerous commodity than dried squid. You've sold it to the wrong customer, and the price is going to be more than you can afford. The sea has a way of washing away foolishness, or drowning it. Quote, the voice is quiet, right beside your ear, cutting through the ocean's roar. You jump, spinning around to see your cousin, Honda Tadakatsu, standing there. He is no longer in his work alcove, but here, in the cold night air, a thin cloak thrown over his simple healer's robes. His face is hard to read in the dim moonlight, shadowed and grim, but you can see the exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders. Tadakatsu, you breathe, your voice rough. He doesn't respond immediately. He just stands beside you, looking out at the tumultuous water. He holds a small ceramic bowl in his hands, from which a faint, sharp medicinal scent rises. You have a scratch on your hand, he says, his voice flat. He gestures to your right hand, where a long, shallow scrape from the cart earlier has beaded with blood. Before you can protest, he takes your hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He dips his fingers into the bowl and begins to clean the wound with a cool, stinging salve. His touch is impersonal, practiced, the way a carpenter might mend a broken chair. Was it worth it? He asks, his eyes still on his work. Your story? Quote, you try to summon your usual bravado, the easy grin that has gotten you out of 100 lesser scrapes. It was just a tale, cousin, a bit of fun to liven up a party. He stops dabbing at the cut and looks up, his eyes finally meeting yours. In the pale light, they are dark and intense. Do not lie to me, Tommy. You are a good liar, the best I know. But you cannot lie to me about this. I saw your face when you told it, and I saw the Lord's face when he heard it. He pauses, letting the weight of that sink in. That was not a story. That was a death sentence. Quote, a shiver runs through you that has nothing to do with the cold. He wouldn't. In a temple, in front of his men. Tadakatsu lets out a short, bitter laugh. You think this place is a sanctuary? For him, it's just another piece of ground he controls. The men? They will believe whatever he tells them to believe. That a clumsy fisherman fell from the cliff path in the dark. That a greedy merchant choked on a fishbone. That a teller of dangerous lies was struck down by the gods for his impiety. He is not a man who leaves things to chance, Tommy. He is a strategist. A problem arises. He dabs the salve on your cut with a final, firm press, and he removes it, cleanly, efficiently. You pull your hand back, the sting of the salve, a pale echo of the fear stinging your insides. Then, what do I do? The question comes out as a whisper, the last of your bravado washed away by the tide. Your cousin looks at you, and for the first time, the healer's stern mask cracks. You see a flicker of something else in his eyes, a grudging respect. A deep, familial worry, pride. It's a strange, conflicting expression. By the ancestors, you are a fool, he says, shaking his head. The biggest fool on this entire coastline. To stand in a hall of wolves and poke the pack leader with a stick. He almost smiles, but it was a brave stick, I will give you that. You spoke a truth that every man in that hall felt in his gut, but did not have the words or the courage to form. Quote, he turns back to the sea, his voice dropping lower, becoming part of the wind and the waves. He will not act tonight. That is not his way. It would be messy, conspicuous. He will wait. He will let the celebration finish. He will let the memory of your face and your story fade from the minds of his drunken soldiers. Then, perhaps tomorrow, or the day after, a solution will present itself. A quiet solution. Quote, he reaches into his robe and pulls out a small, tightly wrapped pouch of oiled paper. It smells of the sharp herbs from his mortar. This is a poultice for fever. A strong one. He presses it into your hand, closing your fingers around it. There is a sickness making its way through the lower ranks. A bowel complaint from the campaign. It is a good cover for a man who needs to disappear for a few days. Quote, you stare at him, understanding dawning. He is giving you a prop, an alibi. Your cart is in the market, he continues, his voice urgent and low. Old man Suzuki is watching it. Go down the back path, the one the servants use. Avoid the main gate. When you get to the market, do not go home. Do not go to the docks. Pack your things. Be the simple fisherman selling his wares. And when the sun rises, get in your cart and head north. Follow the coast. Don't stop until this place is just a bad memory. Find a new village, a new market. Become a new man. He places a hand on your shoulder, his grip tight and brief. You are my blood, Tommy, and I am proud of your stupid, reckless heart. But I am a healer. I fix what is broken, and right now, you are a broken man walking. So go, run. Let the sea wash your tracks away. Quote, without another word, he turns and melts back into the shadows of the temple, leaving you alone on the veranda. You are left with the roar of the sea, the chill of the wind, and the small, pungent pouch in your hand. He called it a poultice for a fever, but you know what it really is. It's a farewell. The festival music sounds impossibly distant now, a world away. You are no longer a guest at the victory celebration. You are a fugitive, and the night has just begun. The pouch in your hand felt both impossibly heavy and utterly insignificant, a tiny charm against a tidal wave of fear. Your cousin's words echoed the sea's roar. Run! Let the sea wash your tracks away. The decision wasn't a thought. It was an instinct, a primal urge that screamed from the base of your spine. You had to move. Now, just as you pushed yourself from the pillar, a new sound cut through the festival din behind you. It wasn't loud. It was a sharp, disciplined bark of an order, followed by the immediate chilling sound of armored men moving with purpose, the clatter of lacquered plates, the scrape of steel-soled footwear on wood. It was not the clumsy shuffle of drunken soldiers. It was the sound of the hunt beginning. You didn't need to look back. The Lord's cold, calculating gaze was now a pack of wolves, and they had your scent. You didn't run for the main path. That was a wide, torch-lit highway to your own execution. Instead, you remembered your cousin's final, vital instruction. They labeled the back path, the one the servants use, asterisk. You scanned the veranda's edge, away from the main hall's glow. There, near a stack of damp firewood and discarded offering baskets, you saw it, a narrow, uninviting break in the railing, leading to what looked less like a path and more like a suggestion of one, plunging into absolute darkness. You darted towards it, your straw sandals slapping softly on the wet wood. Behind you, a shout erupted from the main temple entrance. There! On the veranda! Halt! There was no time for stealth. You vaulted the low railing without breaking stride, your feet landing on a patch of slick, mossy stone. Your ankle twisted, sending a jolt of fire up your leg. But you didn't cry out. The pain was just fuel. You scrambled down the first few feet, half sliding, half falling, your hands clawing at the rocky cliff face for purchase. The solid, man-made world of the temple vanished above you, replaced by a vertical universe of cold rock, gnarled roots, and the terrifying, empty air. The servant's path was a cruel joke. It was a fisherman's nightmare, a series of rickety wooden steps hammered into crevices, connected by narrow ledges of crumbling earth. The wind, which had been a bracing companion on the veranda, was a violent enemy here. It tore at your clothes, trying to peel you from the cliff like a stubborn barnacle. The roar of the waves below was deafening, a constant, thunderous reminder of the penalty for a single misstep. Every creak of a wooden step under your weight was a scream in the darkness. He went down the cliff! Get torches! The voice from above was closer than you liked, carried on a gust of wind. Panic gave way to a strange, sharp clarity. This was your world. Not the temple, not the market, but this knife edge between the land and the sea. You were a fisherman. You knew how to read the currents of the water, and you knew how to read the currents of the rock. Your pursuers were soldiers, men of the flat earth and the battlefield. Here, their armor was a coffin, their training a liability. You moved faster, your bare hands and feet finding holds that a booted soldier would never see. A root like a bony finger, a crack in the stone no wider than a blade, the slight depression where rainwater had eroded a foothold. You were no longer thinking, only moving, your body remembering a lifetime of scrambling on the coastal rocks in search of abalone and seaweed. A beam of light sliced through the darkness above, a brilliant yellow spear cast from a torch. It swept across the cliff face, illuminating the churning white water below for a terrifying, beautiful instant before dancing upwards. You pressed yourself flat into a shallow recess, the cold, damp stone sucking the warmth from your body. You held your breath, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs. The light washed over the rock just above your head, so close you could smell the burning pitch. You saw the silhouette of a helmeted head peering down. See anything? another voice called. "Nothing but rocks and spray!" The fool probably slipped. He's fed the crabs by now. Quote, "There was a pause. You prayed to every god you had ever scoffed at. Let them believe it. Let them give up." "The Lord said to be certain," the first voice replied, grim and determined. "Keep searching. Spread out. He may have tried for the old cove." Your blood ran cold. The old cove. Of course. It was the only other way down, the only place to shelter a boat from the main surf. They knew. The torchlight moved on. You didn't wait. You pushed off from the wall and continued your desperate descent. You could hear them now, crashing through the sparse, hardy bushes above. A curse, the clatter of a dropped weapon on the rocks, the heavy grunts of men unused to such treacherous terrain. They were slow, but they were determined. The air grew thick with salt, the spray from the waves below reaching you now, cold and stinging on your face. You could taste it, feel it. You were close. The last stretch of the path was a steep slide of loose shale that fanned out onto a narrow beach of black pebbles. You didn't even try to keep your footing, you just let go, riding the miniature landslide down, the sharp stones tearing at your clothes and skin. You landed in a heap on the beach, the breath knocked from your lungs, the roar of the surf surrounding you like the world's end. This was the hidden cove of your youth, a place of secret games and first kisses. Tonight it was your only sanctuary. 3 small fishing boats were pulled up on the shingle, their dark shapes huddled together above the high tide line. They were heavy, clinker-built skiffs, impossible for one man to move quickly. A shout from the cliff path above you. "There, on the beach, I see him!" Quote. You scrambled to your feet, adrenaline surging through you, erasing the pain. You ran for the nearest boat, your boat. You recognized the familiar curve of its prow, the specific pattern of mended planks near the stern. Your hands found the thick, coarse rope of the mooring line, your fingers fumbling with the knot. It was swollen and tight from the damp. Your pursuers were coming down the shale slide now, a clumsy, armored avalanche of steel and curses. The knot wouldn't give. In a fit of pure desperation, you abandoned it, searching the bottom of the boat with frantic hands. Your fingers closed around the cold, familiar wood of a gutting knife, its blade sharpened to a razor's edge just that morning. With 2 sharp, sawing cuts, the rope fell away. Now the impossible part. You put your shoulder to the prow and pushed. The boat was a dead weight, its keel digging into the wet pebbles with a god-awful grating sound that seemed louder than the ocean itself. You strained, your muscles screaming, your feet slipping on the wet stones. It moved. An inch. Another. An arrow hissed past your ear, a deadly whisper on the wind, and thudded into the boat's wooden hull. A splinter exploded next to your face. They were on the beach. You could hear their heavy breathing, the slosh of their footwear in the shallows. "Surrender, fisherman. The Lord wants a word with you." Quote. You gave one last, monumental shove. The boat slid forward, its stern finally catching the edge of a surging wave. It lifted, suddenly alive, buoyant. The water swirled around your knees, cold and powerful. You scrambled over the gunwale, landing in a heap amongst the nets and floats. Another arrow skipped off the water beside you. You grabbed a paddle, its wood slick in your hands, and dug it into the churning water. The boat was sluggish, caught in the powerful pull of the undertow that Nobu had warned you about. For a terrifying moment, it seemed to be pulling you back toward the shore, back toward the dark figures wading into the surf, their swords now drawn and gleaming in the faint moonlight. You pulled again, your back and shoulders on fire. The boat responded, turning its nose out to sea. Another pull. You were moving. A wave crashed over the stern, drenching you in freezing water, but it pushed you further out. The shouts of the soldiers grew fainter, swallowed by the roar of the sea. You didn't stop paddling, digging into the black water with a desperate, frantic rhythm. You looked back only once. The beach was a thin strip of darkness. The soldiers were small, frustrated silhouettes. And high above them, perched on the cliff's edge like a malevolent eye, the temple was a cluster of warm, mocking lights. The place of your birth, the source of your livelihood, the scene of your greatest folly, was shrinking behind you. You were alone, a tiny speck in a small wooden boat, surrounded by a vast, churning, indifferent sea. The wind was cold, the water was rough, and you had nothing but the clothes on your back and a useless poultice for a fever you didn't have. You had escaped. But as you rode further into the deep, dark night, with no shore in sight and no destination in mind, You had never felt more trapped in your entire life. The world dissolved into three things: the rhythmic groan of the oar in the lock, the burning scream of your muscles, and the vast, suffocating darkness of the sea. The adrenaline that had propelled you down the cliff and across the water had burned away, leaving a cold, heavy exhaustion in its place. Every pull of the paddle was an act of will. Your hands, soft from years of haggling rather than hard labor, were raw and blistered, the paddle shaft slick with a mixture of salt water and blood. The freezing waves that crashed over the side were no longer a helpful push away from shore, but a constant, draining assault, stealing what little warmth you had left. Your teeth chattered a frantic, uncontrolled rhythm against the boom of the surf. You rowed without direction, your only goal to put distance between yourself and the torchlit cliff. For hours you were a machine of fear, pulling and pulling, your gaze fixed on the churning black water ahead. But as the night wore on, something began to shift. The terror, a hot, sharp thing in your gut, slowly cooled into a dull, throbbing ache. The frantic energy of your escape bled out into the immense, rhythmic breathing of the ocean. The waves rose and fell, and with them, the panic in your chest began to rise and fall, too. The sea was no longer the monstrous, roaring beast of the cliff base, but a vast, moving cradle, rocking you in its cold, indifferent embrace. You stopped rowing, letting the boat drift. You were utterly, completely alone. No lights, no land, just the sliver of a moon above and the endless black swell below. There was no market to open, no lies to spin, no cousin to disappoint, no lord to fear. The man you were yesterday, Tomi Tsuchiya, the clever squid merchant, had died on that cliff. He had drowned in the Lord's cold gaze, been shattered on the stones of the servant's path, and was now sinking into the dark depths behind you. All that was left was this shivering, aching collection of bones in a stolen boat. And in that emptiness, you found something you hadn't expected. A strange, hollow peace. The constant movement of the waves, the endless rise and fall, wasn't chaos. It was a rhythm. A rhythm that mirrored the turmoil that had been churning inside you for days, for years. Here, in the heart of it, your inner storm found its match, and in that matching, a profound and weary quiet settled over you. You were adrift, yes, but you were also, finally, still. When the sun finally rose, it was a miracle of soft, spreading color. It bled across the eastern horizon, turning the gray water to liquid steel, then to shades of rose and molten gold. The light brought no warmth, but it brought sight. Far behind you, a faint, dark smudge against the sky was all that remained of your entire world. You watched it until it was swallowed by the haze of the horizon, feeling not grief, but a profound and final sense of release. You were a blank page. You turned your face to the sun, and, with muscles that felt ripped from the bone, you began to row again, not away from something, but towards whatever came next. For 2 days you drifted and rowed, your world shrinking to the raw essentials of survival. You licked the moisture from the boat's planks at dawn. You found a small, forgotten water skin under a coil of rope with a few mouthfuls of stale, blessedly fresh water. Hunger was a gnawing beast in your belly, but you were a fisherman. You unraveled a line from a net, baited a sliver of your leather sandal onto a rusty hook, and waited. The sea, which had taken everything from you, eventually gave something back. A small, silver-scaled fish that you gutted with your knife and ate raw, the flesh clean and cold and the most delicious thing you had ever tasted. On the morning of the 3rd day, you saw it. A dark line on the horizon that was not a cloud. Land. Hope was a painful, unfamiliar feeling, a muscle you hadn't used in a long time. It took you the rest of the day to reach it, your strokes growing weaker, your vision blurring at the edges. As you drew closer, you saw a small cove, a crescent of pale sand protected by 2 rocky arms reaching into the sea. Nestled within it was a sight that made you want to weep. A cluster of small, thatch-roofed huts, weathered to the color of driftwood, with thin tendrils of smoke rising from them into the evening air. A village. You guided the boat through the calmer waters of the cove, your strength utterly spent. You didn't so much land as collide with the beach, the boat's prow grinding into the soft, wet sand. You tried to stand, but your legs buckled, and you fell into the shallows, the cool water a shock against your feverish skin. You lay there, half in the boat and half in the sea, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves on the shore. Figures emerged from the huts. They were not soldiers in armor, but old men, with faces as weathered as the coastline and women with children clinging to their simple robes. They moved slowly, cautiously, gathering at the edge of the water to stare at the wreckage of the man who had washed up on their shore. You must have been a terrifying sight. Bearded, gaunt, your clothes in tatters, your eyes wild with exhaustion. You expected suspicion, fear, perhaps even a stone thrown in your direction. Instead, an old man with a net draped over his shoulder stepped forward. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes the pale, faded blue of a winter sky. He looked at your boat, at your torn clothes, at the raw, bleeding blisters on your hands. He didn't see a fugitive. He saw a story he knew by heart. "The sea is a cruel mistress," he said, his voice raspy like shells dragging on sand. "She gives with one hand and takes with the other. Looks like she took more than she gave with you, son." Quote, he waded into the water without hesitation, his gnarled hands taking the prow of your boat. Another man joined him, and together they pulled your boat, and you, with it, fully, onto the beach. A woman came forward with a clay jug and knelt beside you, lifting your head and pouring cool, clean water onto your cracked lips. You drank greedily, coughing, the simple kindness of it overwhelming you. You had no name to give them, no story to tell that wasn't a lie or a death sentence. When the old man asked where you were from, you just shook your head, your throat too raw to speak, and pointed vaguely out at the vast, empty ocean. It was enough. In a village like this, the sea was the answer to most questions. It was the source of life, of death, of the sudden arrival of strangers. They didn't need your past. They saw your hands, and they knew you were a fisherman. They saw the exhaustion in your eyes, and they knew you had survived an ordeal. They called you Umiko, child of the sea, and they gave you a bowl of hot fish broth that warmed you to your soul, and a dry spot on the floor of a hut that smelled of salt and wood smoke, where you fell into a sleep so deep it was like a second death. You stayed. You had nowhere else to go. You worked to earn your keep, your body slowly remembering the hard, honest labor it had forgotten. You did not speak of your past, and they did not ask. Your new identity was forged in silence and sweat. You rose before dawn with the other men, your feet growing tough on the cold sand. You mended their nets, your fingers weaving the twine with a speed and skill that earned you nods of respect. You learned the names of the currents in this new cove, the locations of the hidden reefs, the particular way the gulls circled when the fish were running close to shore. You were no longer Tomi, the outgoing teller of tall tales. Umiko was quiet, watchful. Your booming market voice was gone, replaced by the soft tones of a man who listens more than he speaks. You found a strange comfort in the simplicity of it all. Here, a man's worth was measured by the weight of his catch, the strength of his back, and the reliability of his knots. There were no lords, no politics, no dangerous truths hiding beneath the surface. There was only the sun, the sea, the work, and the quiet community of people who understood that survival depended on pulling together. They were humble, poor, and the kindest people you had ever known. One evening, weeks after your arrival, you sat alone on the beach, watching the last of the boats return, their silhouettes dark against the fiery sunset. The village was peaceful, the air filled with the smell of cooking fires and the sound of children's laughter. You were safe, you were fed, you were, for the first time in a long time, content. And it was in that moment of contentment that the past came for you, not with swords and torches, but with the quiet insistence of a memory. You closed your eyes and you were back in the temple, the air thick with incense and sake. You saw the scarred samurai's confused, angry face. You saw your cousin's look of weary disappointment. You saw Lord Honda's eyes, those 2 chips of black ice, fixing on you from across the hall. You felt again that surge of reckless, defiant pride as you told your fisherman's tale, planting that seed of truth in the poisoned soil of the Lord's victory. Was it worth it? The question settled in your gut, a cold, heavy stone. You had spoken a truth, yes. A terrible, necessary truth about a victory won by poison and dishonor. For one brief, shining moment, you had held a mirror up to power, and you had not flinched. Nobu's respectful bow had been a validation of that, but what was the result? The Lord was still a lord, secure in his castle. His victory, however tainted, was still a victory. The world had not changed. The only thing that had broken, the only thing that had been washed away, was you. You had traded your home, your name, your livelihood, your entire existence, for one moment of speaking out. Was that courage? Or was it the ultimate act of a deceitful man's ego? The need to show how clever you were, even if it destroyed you. You had always used stories to get what you wanted. A better price for your squid, a favor from a friend. That night in the temple, you had done the same. But the story was true, and the price was your own life. You looked at your hands. They were no longer the hands of a merchant. They were hard, calloused, scarred from hooks and lines. The hands of Umiko. This new life, this simple, peaceful existence, was the consequence of your actions. It was your reward and your punishment, all at once. You didn't have an answer. The scales of risk and outcome were impossible to balance. You had lost everything you'd ever known, and in its place you had found a quiet dignity you'd never had before. You had spoken a dangerous truth and been exiled for it, and that exile had led you to a strange, unexpected sanctuary. You looked out at the water, the setting sun painting a brilliant, bleeding path across its surface. The sea had washed your tracks away, just as your cousin had said. It had given you a new life, but you knew, with a certainty that chilled you to the bone, that you would spend the rest of that life wondering if you had paid too much for it. The seasons turned, pulling the tide of your life out and in with the same reliable rhythm as the ocean. The blistering heat of summer gave way to the crisp, clean winds of autumn. Your skin, once merely weathered by the sun of the marketplace, was now cured by salt and wind into the tough leather of a true seaman. The name Tomi was a ghost, a whisper from another man's life. You were Umiko. And Umiko belonged to this village, to the scent of wood smoke and drying nets, to the pre-dawn chill on the beach and the shared warmth of sake around a fire after a good catch. The deceitful, ambitious man had been scoured away, leaving behind someone quieter, stronger, and more honest than you had ever been. But the sea, as the old fisherman Jiro often said, always keeps what it is owed. And it had not yet finished collecting its debt from you. The first tremor came with a traveling merchant, a man selling iron pots and needles who passed through the village once a year. While bartering for a string of dried mackerel, he shared news from the wider world. He spoke of a good rice harvest, a new tax from the regional governor, and, almost as an afterthought, a strange obsession that had taken hold of the Lord Honda Tadakatsu. A powerful man, they say, but with a thorn in his paw, the merchant said, tapping a pot to demonstrate its quality. He spends a fortune on it, has men searching every port and fishing village from here to the capital. Looking for a ghost, it seems, a fisherman who vanished into the sea one night. Your hands, which were expertly tying a knot, froze for a fraction of a second. You forced them to move again, to finish the loop, to pull it tight. A fisherman? You asked, your voice carefully neutral, the voice of Umiko. Must have been an important man to warrant such a search. Quote, the merchant shrugged, his eyes on his wares. Not important, just embarrassing. The story goes, this fisherman insulted the Lord, spun some vile treasonous tale right in the middle of his victory feast, then slipped through the fingers of his best samurai. The Lord's honor is at stake, you see. He can't abide a loose thread in the tapestry of his power. They say he won't rest until the man's head is on a spike. Quote, the merchant moved on, his gossip trailing behind him like the dust from his sandals, but his words lingered in the air, a poison only you could smell. The peace you had so carefully constructed over the past year shattered like a clay pot dropped on stone. The fear you thought you had left to drown in the deep ocean came roaring back, a monstrous wave cresting inside you. The world, which had become simple and real, suddenly felt thin and treacherous again. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The friendly faces of the villagers now seemed like potential accusers. The arrival of a new boat in the cove sent you scrambling for cover among the rocks, your heart hammering in your chest. You became a ghost of a different kind. You still worked, your body moving through the familiar rhythms of mending nets and hauling lines, but your mind was elsewhere, back on that cliff, in that temple, under the cold, calculating gaze of the warlord. You grew silent, your watchfulness turning into a hunted paranoia. The other fishermen noticed. They would clap you on the shoulder, their rough hands a gesture of camaraderie, and you would flinch. One evening, as you sat staring into the fire, pretending to sharpen a gutting knife that was already razor-sharp, old Jiro sat down beside you. He didn't speak for a long time, simply feeding small pieces of driftwood into the flames. "The sea is not the only thing with a dangerous undertow, Umiko," he finally said, his gaze fixed on the dancing fire. "Sometimes the strongest currents are the ones inside a man. They can pull you down into cold, dark places where you can't breathe." He paused, poking a log with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. "This village is a strong boat, but a man must choose to stay in it. If he tries to swim alone in a storm, he will surely perish." Quote, "He was offering you a lifeline, a quiet testament of trust. He did not know your story, but he saw the storm in you, and he was telling you that you did not have to face it alone. The kindness of it was a sharp pain in your chest, a stark contrast to the fear that had become your constant companion. But how could you accept? To tell them the truth would be to bring the warlord's shadow down upon them all, to repay their kindness with a death sentence. To remain silent felt like a betrayal. You were trapped, just as you had been in your little boat on that first night, adrift between two impossible shores. The crisis came on a day when the sea was calm, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. A boat appeared in the mouth of the cove. It was not a fishing skiff. It was larger, sleeker, a coastal trading vessel that flew no particular banner, but moved with a speed and purpose that set every nerve in your body on edge. You were on the beach, mending a large dragnet with two other fishermen, and the sight of it made the blood drain from your face. This was it. They had found you. You dropped the net and began backing away, your mind screaming at you to run, to find a cave, to disappear. The other fishermen looked at you, then at the boat, their expressions confused. The vessel dropped anchor in the deeper water of the cove, and a small skiff was lowered into the water. A single figure began to row toward the shore. You squinted, your heart a stone in your stomach. It was not a soldier. The man was dressed in the simple robes of a traveler or a monk, his head covered by a wide, woven straw hat that shadowed his face. But there was something in the set of his shoulders, in the powerful, efficient way he handled the oars, that was horribly familiar. You turned and ran, not toward the village, but toward the rocky cliffs that bordered the beach, the same instinct that had saved you once before taking over. You heard the villagers calling after you, "Umiko, what is it? Who is that?" But their voices were distant. You scrambled up the rocks, finding handholds and footholds, the rough stones scraping your palms. "Tommy!" The name hit you like a physical blow. It stopped you in your tracks halfway up the rock face. It was a name no one had spoken in over a year, a name that belonged to a dead man. Slowly, fearfully, you turned your head. The skiff had landed. The man was standing on the beach, his straw hat pushed back. The sun glinted off the familiar sharp planes of his face, the worried furrow of his brow, the confident set of his jaw. It was your cousin, Honda Tadakatsu. Relief washed over you with such force that your knees went weak, and you nearly lost your grip. You clung to the rock, your breath coming in ragged gasps, as you watched him speak calmly to the villagers who had gathered around him, their faces a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. After a few moments he bowed to them and began walking towards you, alone. You scrambled the rest of the way down, your legs trembling, and met him at the base of the rocks, hidden from the view of the village. You stared at each other for a long moment, the sound of the gentle waves filling the silence. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper. He was thinner, too, as if he had been carrying a heavy burden. "Tadakatsu," you finally managed to say, your voice a hoarse whisper. "How?" Quote, "It was not easy," he said, his voice low and tired. "The warlord's men are thorough, but they look for a boastful fisherman with a quick tongue named Tomitsuchiya. I looked for a quiet man with skilled hands and haunted eyes." He gave you a sad, weary smile. "I followed the whispers up the coast, stories of a silent fisherman who could mend any net and read the sea like a book. They called him the Child of the Sea. It sounded like something you would have invented for yourself." Quote, "The fear which had receded returned as a cold dread, the whispers, then the warlord." Quote, "He has not forgotten," Tadakatsu said, his expression turning grim. "He will never forget. You did more than insult him, Tomi. Your story, it took root. It was a seed of truth in a field of lies, and it has grown into a weed he cannot eradicate. The men who were there that night, they remember. They whisper it in their cups. The story of the poisoned victory, of the fisherman who spoke the truth and vanished. It has become a legend, a blemish on his perfect campaign. It makes him look weak, foolish, and he cannot suffer that. His search is not just about punishment anymore. It is an obsession. He needs to erase the story, and to do that, he needs to erase the storyteller. You sank down onto a rock, the weight of his words pressing down on you. You had thought yourself safe, anonymous. But you had only become a myth, and myths attract attention. They are getting closer, Tadakatsu continued, his voice urgent. His spies are more methodical now. They no longer just storm into towns. They listen. They ask quiet questions. They are mapping the coast, village by village. They will find this place. Perhaps in a month. Perhaps in a season. But they will come. Quote, you looked out at the tranquil cove, at the small, peaceful village that had become your home. You saw old Jiro's kind, wrinkled face. You heard the laughter of the children you had taught to fish. Bringing the warlord's wrath here would be a massacre. I have to leave, you said, the words tasting like ash. No, Tadakatsu said, his voice firm. He sat on the rock beside you. He reached into his robes and pulled out a heavy leather pouch, which he pressed into your hand. You felt the cold, heavy clink of coins. Running is what you did before. When you were alone, you are not that man anymore, and you are not alone now. You looked at him, confused. What can we do? He is a warlord! Quote, and I am his kinsman, Tadakatsu said, a hard light in his eyes. A minor, insignificant kinsman who deals in herbs and salves, but I bear his name. I have access. I have resources. While his men search the coast, I have been building a different kind of net. I have contacts in the capital, merchants who owe me favors, monks who travel the roads and see everything. The world is larger than Lord Honda's province. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. To run without a plan is to be a fugitive. But to move with a purpose, toward a destination, that is a journey. I can get you passage on a rice barge heading south, far beyond the warlord's reach. A new life, a real one, under a new name with papers to prove it. But you must be ready to move the instant I send word. No hesitation. He stood up, placing a hand on your shoulder. His grip was strong, reassuring. I am a healer, Tommy. My purpose is to fight sickness. And Lord Honda, in his pride, has become a sickness upon the land. I cannot cut him out, but I can help one good man escape the fever. He looked you in the eye, and you saw not pity, but a fierce, defiant pride. What you did in that temple, it was the act of a fool. But it was also the bravest thing I have ever seen. You gave a voice to the dead. Do not let him silence you for good. He left you there, on the rocks, with the pouch of coins and the heavy weight of his loyalty. He rowed back to his ship, which raised its anchor, and sailed away as quietly as it had arrived, leaving the cove in peace once more. You walked back to the village, the coins a cold, heavy promise in your hand. The fear was still there, a knot of ice in your stomach. But it was different now. It was no longer the shapeless, panicked terror of a cornered animal. It was the sharp, clear fear of a man with something to protect, an ally to trust, and a choice to make. You looked at the huts, at the people who had taken you in, at the sea that had both destroyed and saved you. You were no longer just a ghost running from a shadow. You were Umiko of this village, and you would not let the warlord's shadow touch it without a fight. The waiting was its own kind of torture, a slow poison that seeped into the marrow of your new life. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The pouch of coins from Tadakatsu was a cold, secret weight hidden beneath the floorboards of your hut, a constant reminder that this peace was borrowed, this life conditional. You threw yourself into the rhythms of the village with a desperate fervor, as if by becoming more Umiko you could somehow kill the last vestiges of Tomi. You rose with the gulls, your bare feet unerring on the path to the beach. The work became your prayer. The ache in your back from hauling nets, the sting of salt in a cut, the rough texture of twine against your calloused palms. These were real things, solid things, anchors against the phantom currents of your past, and you were good at it. Your old life's cleverness, once used to swindle and charm, was repurposed. You saw patterns in the water others missed. You developed a new kind of dragnet, one that skimmed the sandy bottom with fewer snags, and your design was quickly adopted by the whole village. When young Kenta, the woodcarver's son, fell and broke his arm, you were the one who remembered the trick of setting a bone you'd once seen a back-alley healer perform, fashioning a splint from driftwood and fishing line that earned a grunt of approval from old Jiro. You became known as a man with clever hands and a quiet, steady presence. Kind. That one word followed you like a gentle shadow, so different from the one that haunted your dreams. You would share your catch with the widow Aya without a word, leaving a string of glistening fish on her doorstep. You taught the children how to read the clouds for signs of a squall. You were woven into the fabric of the village, a strong, reliable thread. But every night, the fear returned. You would lie on your sleeping mat, the gentle sound of the surf a lullaby to the rest of the village, but a torment to you. Every distant shout, every dog's bark, was the sound of discovery. You would creep to the door of your hut and peer out into the moon-drenched night, scanning the mouth of the cove for the silhouette of a warlord's ship. The warlord's obsession, as your cousin had described it, was a living creature, a patient predator slowly circling, and you were the bait that endangered this entire innocent world. This life of acceptance was a beautiful, fragile shell, and you lived in constant terror of the sound of it cracking. The news arrived on the wind, carried by a man who was little more than a scarecrow of skin and bone. He was a lay pilgrim, he said, walking from shrine to shrine, his journey taking him south, away from the troubles of the northern provinces. The villagers, in their simple, profound generosity, took him in. They gave him the seat of honor by the fire, filled his bowl with fish stew, and listened to his stories. You sat on the edge of the circle, whittling a net float, keeping your face down, your posture unremarkable. The pilgrim spoke of the harsh new taxes, of the conscription of young men for border skirmishes, of the heavy hand of Lord Honda Tadakatsu. His rule, which had begun with a victory procession, had curdled into a grim and paranoid reign. Then his gaze turned distant, troubled. "The heart of the province has grown cold," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Even the holy places are not immune. The cliff temple watching the sea. It is a place of sorrow now. A place of fear." Your knife stilled in your hand. The piece of wood felt impossibly heavy. Every muscle in your body went rigid. Old Jiro leaned forward. "Sorrow? It was always a place of peace." Quote, "Peace is a fragile thing, old father," the pilgrim said, shaking his head. "It can be shattered by a single loud lie." The warlord. He found a scapegoat for the whispers that plagued his victory. The dark rumors of how the castle truly fell. You forced yourself to breathe. In. Out. You were Umiko, a quiet fisherman listening to a traveler's tale. You were not here. You were invisible. He did not blame the fisherman who was said to have started the tale, the pilgrim continued, and you felt a strange, sickening lurch of relief that was immediately followed by a wave of dread. That one was a ghost vanished into the sea. No, the warlord is more cunning than that. A ghost cannot be punished, but a man of flesh and blood can. He chose the temple's bell ringer. Quote, "The name was a silent scream in your mind. Plawfully Nobu, a humble man. A man named Nobu Nakagawa," the pilgrim said, his eyes filled with a pained memory. The warlord's men dragged him from his duties. They proclaimed that he, a servant of the temple, had been the one to create the blasphemous lies, that he had sullied the Lord's honor and profaned the temple with his twisted tongue. They said he was in league with enemy spirits. The faces around the fire were grim, horrified. You could feel their shock, their disbelief. You felt nothing at all. You were a hollowed-out log, floating on a black sea. They tortured him, the pilgrim's voice cracked, in the temple courtyard, for all to see. They demanded a confession. They demanded he name his accomplices. But the bell ringer, Saleh, he was made of something other than flesh. He did not cry out. He did not confess. He only said one thing, over and over, until his voice gave out. "The truth has no author," he whispered. "It simply is. Single quote, quote." You closed your eyes. You could see him, Nobu, in his simple gray robes, his hands clasped, his eyes clear and unnervingly perceptive. "The sea is loud today. It sings a song of deep currents and hidden rocks." Asterisk. He had seen it all, right from the start. His silence enraged the warlord, the pilgrim went on, his voice trembling now. It was a defiance more powerful than any army, so the warlord devised a final cruelty. He could not get a confession, so he would create one. On the third day, they dragged the broken man to the great bronze bell. They put the striking log in his hands. They had to tie his wrists to it, and the warlord himself stood before the crowd and announced that the bell ringer, in his remorse, would now ring the bell to proclaim the glory of the Lord's victory and the falsehood of the evil rumors. Quote, A collective gasp went through the villagers. You felt bile rise in your throat. But Nobu, even then, he would not. He hung from the log, limp. He refused to be the instrument of their lie. So the soldiers, on the Lord's command, swung the log for him. They used his body like a puppet, forcing him to strike the bell. The sound! Oh, the sound! The pilgrim shuddered, wrapping his thin arms around himself. It was not the clear, deep boom of evening prayer. It was a dead sound, a cracked, mournful clang that echoed across the water like a cry of damnation. They made him ring it 3 times, a hollow proclamation of his own guilt, and with the final sickening strike, they slit his throat and let his body fall at the foot of the bell he had served his entire life. Quote, silence. A profound, absolute silence descended on the beach, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft sigh of the waves. The story was over. The villagers stared into the flames, their faces etched with horror and grief. Someone was weeping softly. It was the widow Aya. You stood up. The movement was jerky, uncontrolled. The net float and knife fell from your numb fingers into the sand. You turned and walked away from the fire, away from the circle of grieving villagers, your steps stiff and robotic. You heard Jiro call your name, Umiko, but you did not turn back. You walked to the water's edge, your straw sandals sinking into the wet, cold sand. You stared out at the black expanse of the sea, the sliver of moon casting a cold, broken path across its surface. The guilt was a physical thing. It was a stone in your gut, a hand around your throat. You were the author. The truth may not have one, but the story did. Your story. Your clever, deceitful, reckless story, told to impress a few drunken samurai. You had lit the fuse and run away, leaving the humble, brave bell ringer to be consumed by the explosion. He had stayed. He had faced the consequences of your words. He had been tortured and murdered, his body used as a puppet to ring a lie across the water, all because of you. He had bowed to you that night, a gesture of respect for an act of courage. But you hadn't been courageous. You had been a coward who was now safe in a peaceful village, while a truly brave man's blood stained the stones of a holy place. You sank to your knees in the cold surf, the water soaking your clothes, the chill seeping into your bones. But it could not touch the ice inside you. You had run to save your life, but what was that life worth now? It was a life purchased with Nobu's death. Every breath you took was one he could not. Every sunrise you saw was one he would be denied. The peace you had found here, the acceptance, the name Umiko. It was all a sham, a lie built on the grave of a better man. You clawed at the sand, your fingers digging into the wet grit. A wave crashed over your legs, strong and cold, trying to pull you in. For a moment you thought of letting it. Let the sea finish what it started. Let it wash away the guilt, the memory, the worthless life of the man who had caused so much suffering. It would be so easy. But as the wave receded, leaving you shivering and solid on the shore, you saw him again in your mind's eye, not broken and bleeding, but as he was in the temple, his eyes clear and calm. Be wary that this current does not pull you down into depths from which you cannot return. Asterisk, he had not been warning you about the warlord. He had been warning you about this, about despair, about giving up. His death could not be meaningless. It could not be a simple tragedy that ended with you drowning your guilt in the sea. That would be the final insult to his sacrifice. Slowly, painfully, you pushed yourself to your feet. You were dripping, shivering, a wretched figure on the edge of the world. You turned your back on the sea and walked back to your hut, your steps no longer aimless, but filled with a terrible cold purpose. You knelt, prized up the loose floorboard, and pulled out the leather pouch Tadakatsu had given you. The coins were heavy in your palm, no longer a means of escape, but something else entirely. They were a weapon, a resource, a seed. The Lord Hondo wanted to erase the storyteller, to kill the story. He had murdered Nobu to create a lie. You understood now. Running wasn't enough. Hiding wasn't enough. Surviving wasn't enough. You had to ensure the story lived. Not your story, the boastful tale of a fisherman. The truth. The truth that Nobu had protected with his silence and his life. The truth of a victory won by poison, and of the humble bell ringer who refused to ring a lie. The fear was gone, the paranoia, the constant looking over your shoulder. It was all burned away by the cold, pure fire of your grief. You were no longer afraid of being found. You were no longer afraid of dying. You were afraid of letting Nobu's death be for nothing. You clutched the pouch of coins, your knuckles white. You would use them. You would use your cousin's network. You would not run. You would fight. Not with a sword, but with the only weapon you had ever truly mastered. You would make sure the truth had a voice, and that it would ring louder and truer than any bell a tyrant could force a dead man to strike. The years that followed were a long, slow grind, like a tide wearing down a stone. The fire of your grief for Nobu did not burn out. Instead, it banked low, transforming from a wild, consuming flame into a core of white-hot embers that fueled a cold and patient purpose. You remained Umiko, the quiet fisherman. The name was no longer a disguise, but a testament, an identity forged in the crucible of your past. To the village, you were a rock. Your hands, once soft and quick with coin, were now broad and hard, capable of mending any tear in a net, setting any dislocated joint, or carving a perfect likeness of a seabird from a piece of driftwood. You were their steady hand, their quiet counsel, their child of the sea. They never knew about your other life. The one lived in whispers and shadows. The pouch of coins from Tadakatsu became your secret arsenal. When a talkative merchant passed through, you would buy his most expensive wares, not because you needed them, but because the transaction bought you time and loosened his tongue. You would learn of troop movements, of shifting alliances, the growing paranoia in Lord Honda's court. Sometimes, you would find a young storyteller, a traveling monk with a clever tongue and an empty belly. You would give them a few coins, enough for a month's travel, and you would not ask for a story, but give them one. You would tell them, in your quiet, even voice, the tale of a humble bell-ringer who protected the truth with his silence. You never mentioned the warlord by name, nor the fisherman. You just told the story of Nobu Nakagawa. You planted it like a hardy seed in the fertile ground of their travels, trusting the wind to carry it where it needed to go. Your war was fought not with steel, but with memory. 5 years passed. Then 7. The children you had taught to fish were now young men and women, with children of their own who called you Uncle Umiko. Old Jiro's back was bent now, and he spent his days in the sun, watching you lead the boats out, his expression one of deep, abiding pride. You had found a life here, a real one, woven from thousands of small, honest moments, but every night you met with the ghosts. Nobu, his eyes clear and calm, your cousin, his face etched with worry, the warlord, his gaze a black pit of cold fury. You had learned to live with them. They were as much a part of you as the salt in your blood. The end of your war came not with a clash of swords or a secret message from your cousin, but on a blustery autumn afternoon, brought by a man selling salt. He was a sour-faced man from a northern port, and he grumbled about the state of the world as he measured out his product. The whole province is a mess, he complained, pouring a stream of coarse white crystals into the clay pot you held. Has been ever since Lord Honda went mad. Your hands did not tremble. Your expression did not change. You were a statue carved from sea-weathered wood. Mad? You asked, your voice the placid murmur of a fisherman making conversation. As a loon in a typhoon, the salt merchant scoffed. It started years ago, they say. Couldn't trust anyone, saw traitors in his own shadow, it all came from that old story. He paused, looking at you with a flicker of interest. You're from the sea, you must have heard it. The one about his great victory being won with a poison wind, and how the ghost of a fisherman told the tale. Quote, stories are for children and long nights, you said, your voice flat. They have little to do with the price of salt. Quote, the merchant laughed, a short, barking sound. This story did. It stuck to him like tar. His best men, the ones who were at that victory feast, they started to desert him. They'd seen too much. Their honor couldn't stomach it. The final straw was the bell ringer. He lowered his voice, as if the wind itself might be listening. Everyone knew what really happened that day. They saw an innocent man murdered to prop up a lie. A man can't lead soldiers who believe he has no honor. His power just rotted from the inside out. He took your payment, his sour mood momentarily forgotten in the pleasure of his grim tale. Last winter, the Takeda clan tested the border. A minor skirmish, should have been nothing. But when the warlord gave the order to advance, his own commanders refused the banner. Just stood there and watched him. They wouldn't fight for a man whose victory was a shame and whose word was poison. Quote, he shook his head, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He retreated to his castle, locked himself away. They say his mind finally broke. He was found a month ago. dead in his chambers. Not a mark on him. Some say he starved himself. Others say he was haunted to death by the ghost of the bell ringer. Either way, he's gone. His heir is a boy, and the province is chaos. Better for trade, in the long run. Quote, the merchant finished his business and left, his cart rattling away down the coastal track. You stood alone on the beach, the bag of salt clutched in your hand. He was gone. The warlord, the great and terrible Lord Honda Tadakatsu, whose gaze had chased you across the sea and haunted your every waking moment for nearly a decade, was dead. Not by your hand, not by an army's might, but by the slow, inexorable weight of his own lie. Your truth had been a single drop of dye in a clear pool, and over years it had colored everything. The victory you had dreamed of, the justice you had sought for Nobu, had arrived. You felt nothing. There was no surge of triumph, no cry of relief, just a vast, hollow silence inside you, deeper and more profound than the quiet of the sea at dawn. The embers of purpose that had burned within you for so long, that had defined your every action, simply went cold, leaving behind a fine gray ash of exhaustion. You had won, and the silence that followed was deafening. You walked to the edge of the water, letting the waves hiss and foam around your ankles. You had done it. You had ensured the story lived. The truth had outlasted the tyrant. But as you stood there, the victor on a lonely shore, you understood the full, terrible weight of the price. The truth hadn't come for free. It had been purchased with a man's life. Your safety had been bought with Nobu's agony. This victory was paid for with a currency of blood and sacrifice that you could never, ever repay. And in that moment, you finally knew, with a clarity that was as cold and sharp as the winter sea, that you would never be at peace. The warlord's downfall didn't free you. It only removed the object of your focus, forcing you to turn and face the ghost who had been standing behind you all along, Nobu. His sacrifice was not a weight that could be set down now that the fight was over. It was a part of you. You had run from the warlord's shadow only to find yourself living forever in Nobu's. That evening, you did not join the others around the fire. You walked to the far end of the cove, to a small, tide-hollowed cave where you kept your best carving tools. By the light of a single oil lamp, you took a piece of sun-bleached driftwood, its grain twisted and beautiful from its long journey in the sea. Your hands, which had once spun lies, and later, nets, moved with a new kind of reverence. You did not carve a fish or a bird. You carved a bell. A small, perfect temple bell, its surface smooth, its lip flared just so. You did not carve an inscription. It needed none. When it was finished, you took it from the cave. The moon was high and full, laying a brilliant silver path across the water. You waded out, the water rising to your waist, your chest, until you were floating, held aloft by the cold, dark water. You held the small wooden bell up to the moonlight, a silent offering to the sky, to the sea, to the memory of a humble man. The truth has no author, asterisk, you thought, the words echoing Nobu's own. It simply is. And so was the price. It had no end. It simply was. You released the bell. It floated for a moment on the surface, a dark shape on the shimmering water, before the tide took it, pulling it gently, inexorably, out into the great, dark expanse. You watched until it was gone. You did not feel forgiveness or absolution. You felt only a quiet, profound acceptance. You turned and swam back to the shore, the village a warm cluster of sleeping lights. You were Umiko, the child of the sea. You were Tommy, the teller of a dangerous truth. You were a coward who had run, and a warrior who had won. You were all of these things. You were a man who had paid the price, and who would continue to pay it with every breath, every sunrise, for the rest of his quiet, honorable, and haunted life. The war was over, but the watch was eternal. And as you walked back to your hut, the sound of the waves on the shore was, for the first time, not a roar or a whisper, but the clear, unending echo of a bell that could never be silenced. You walked back into the village as the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. The huts were still sleeping, their thatched roofs dark against the growing light. The air was cold and clean. It was a morning like any other, but the world felt fundamentally altered, as if a great weight had been lifted from it, only to be settled squarely upon your own shoulders. You were no longer looking over your shoulder for the warlord's spies. The hunter was dead. The war was over. And in the silence that followed, you were forced to finally face the man you had become. You went about your morning tasks with the slow, deliberate motions of a man in a dream. You checked the mooring lines of the fishing boats, your calloused fingers testing the knots with an unconscious expertise. You kindled a small fire, the familiar scent of wood smoke, a comfort that did not quite reach the cold hollow in your chest. The villagers began to stir, greeting you with their usual quiet warmth. "A fine morning for fishing, Umiko-san." "The wind is turning, yes." You nodded, you smiled. You spoke the simple, honest words of your assumed life, but your mind was a vast, churning sea. Deception, you thought, as you patched a small hole in a net, the wooden needle weaving in and out, mending the tear. Deception had been the first language you ever mastered. You remembered your stall in the market, the bustling crowds, the easy booming laughter. You had been a weaver of words then, too, spinning tales of squid wrestled from sea gods and fish blessed by ocean spirits. They were harmless lies you'd always told yourself, little bits of colored thread to make the dull fabric of commerce more exciting. They made people smile. They made the squid sell faster. What was the harm? You had seen deception as a tool, a simple fisherman's net to catch a few extra coins. You never imagined that the same net, cast in a different sea, could drag a nation's secrets to the surface and drown a good man. The warlord's deception had been of a different order entirely. It was not a net, but a fortress wall, built to protect his power. His lie about Nobu was not a harmless flourish. It was a bludgeon. It was a lie forged in steel and tempered in blood, designed not to charm, but to crush. He had tried to kill a truth by murdering its supposed author, believing that if he controlled the story, he controlled reality. And for a time, it worked. His lie was loud, amplified by the trumpets of his authority and the screams of a tortured man. It was a lie that had the weight of an army behind it. And yet, it had crumbled. It had rotted from within, eaten away by a smaller, quieter truth that refused to die. A truth you had set loose. And what of your deception? The life of Umiko. You looked at your hands, at the tough, scarred skin, the broad palms. These were not the hands of Tomitsuchiya. They were the hands of Umiko, a man who had earned the trust and respect of a village. A man who was known for his steadiness, his skill, his kindness. This life, this identity, was the most profound lie you had ever constructed. You were a fugitive, living under a false name among people who had offered you nothing but unguarded acceptance. Yet, within that lie, you had lived more honestly than you ever had in your life as Tomi. As Tomi, your kindness was a tactic, your outgoing nature a performance. As Umiko, your quiet acts of service were genuine, born from a deep, unspoken gratitude and a desperate need to build something real in the ruins of your past. You had found your own truth inside a lie. The paradox was a knot you could never untangle. The children of the village, seeing you mending the net, ran over. A little girl named Hana, with eyes as bright and dark as polished stones, handed you a perfect spiral shell she had found. You took it, your large, rough hand gentle as you turned it over, admiring its whorls. You thanked her, and she beamed, a smile of pure, uncomplicated joy. You looked at her, at the other children chattering around you, and you saw the legacy of your actions in their innocent faces. They were safe. Their fathers had not been conscripted to fight for a paranoid tyrant. Their village would not be raked over by spies looking for a ghost. Your actions, your lies, and your truths had helped secure this small pocket of peace for them, and Nobu's death had paid for it. The thought was a physical blow, and you had to steady yourself against the side of a boat. The children saw your sudden pallor and fell quiet, their smiles fading into looks of concern. "Are you all right, Uncle Umiko?" a small boy asked. You forced a smile, the muscles in your face feeling stiff and unfamiliar. "Just an old ache," you said. "The sea leaves its mark." "The sea, and the bell ringer." The faces of these children, their safe and happy lives, were part of Nobu's legacy. He had died not just for a principle, but for this, for the chance for a child to find a perfect shell on a peaceful morning. But did that make it right? Did the good you had preserved for the many outweigh the evil you had brought upon the one? You had cast a stone into a pond, and the ripples had both destroyed a man and saved a village. You could not separate the two. The triumph and the tragedy were forever intertwined. You, the architect of it all, were left to stand on the shore and watch the rings spread, knowing you were responsible for every part of the pattern. That afternoon, you took a boat out alone, not to fish, but simply to be on the water. You rowed until the village was a small smudge on the coastline, until there was only the gray-blue water and the endless sky. You shipped the oars and let the boat drift. This was where your second life had begun, adrift and alone, and it was here you had to make sense of its end. The struggle, you realized, was not truly over. It had only changed its form. The warlord was gone, but the nature of power, the temptation of the easy lie, the cost of the hard truth, these things were eternal. They were not confined to the courts of lords and the halls of temples. They existed in every village, in every marketplace, in every human heart. You had seen the warlord's grand lie collapse, but you knew that other lies were being spun at that very moment in other places by other men hungry for power. And other truths were being whispered, at great risk, by other brave souls. The battle you had fought was just one skirmish in a war that would never end. Your role in that war had changed. You were no longer a fugitive, no longer a secret purveyor of subversive tales. You were now a keeper of the flame, a living monument to the complexity of it all. You had started this journey as a deceiver, become a reluctant truth-teller, and now you were something else, a consequence. Your life was the sum total of every choice, every lie, every desperate gamble. You were a reminder, if only to yourself, that every action has its echo. Even the quietest acts of rebellion, like planting a story, could topple a throne. And even the noblest of victories could be haunted by the ghosts of their cost. You picked up the oars and began to row back to shore, your strokes slow and steady. You were not rowing away from a past you could not escape, but toward a future you had to live. Your life was your penance and your memorial. In your quiet service to the village, in every net you mended and every child you taught, you would honor the man whose death had purchased your life. You would not let his sacrifice be a source of despair that drowned you, but a standard you had to live up to. You had to be worthy of the price he paid. You had to be the good man he would have wanted you to be. As you neared the cove, you saw the villagers on the beach, preparing the boats for the evening tide. They saw you and raised their hands in greeting. You raised a hand in return. They saw Umiko, their Umiko, the steady, reliable fisherman. They did not see the deceiver, the coward, the kingbreaker. They did not see the ghosts standing beside you in the boat. And that, you understood, was how it had to be. Your burden was yours alone to carry. You would live out your days in this village. You would grow old. You would teach the children's children how to read the sea. And you would carry the story of Nobunagawa inside you, a sacred, silent trust. You would be the bell that never rang, a quiet testament to the truth he died for. And perhaps in the end, that was the only real victory. Not the fall of a tyrant, but the preservation of a memory, the quiet, unending choice to live an honest life. Born from the ashes of a legacy of deception, the struggle was not over. It was simply inside you now, a deep and endless current you would navigate for all the rest of your days. The wind on the clifftop is an old friend now. It no longer tears at you with the violence of your escape, but combs through your thin white hair with a gentle, familiar touch. You are seated on a smooth, sun-warmed rock, the very cliff that has been your silent companion for decades. It is not the cliff of the temple, that place of fear and firelight. This one is humbler, overlooking the small, peaceful cove that became your world. Your back is straight, but the years have carved their own story onto your body. Your hands, resting on your knees, are gnarled maps of a life lived by the sea, the knuckles swollen, the skin a latticework of scars from hooks and lines and 1,000 honest tasks. You are Tomi. You are Umiko. You are, finally, just an old man watching the sun go down. Below, the village is preparing for the evening. You can see the lights twinkling on one by one in the huts, warm orange sparks in the growing twilight. You see the bent figure of Kenta, the woodcarver's son, whose arm you set all those years ago. Now a master craftsman himself, his own son trailing at his heels. You see Hana, the little girl who gave you a perfect shell, now a mother with a voice that is the heart of the village's evening songs. You have watched them live and love and grow old alongside you. You are woven into the story of this place, a quiet, sturdy thread in their beautiful, simple tapestry. They have given you a home. You pray you have given them a measure of peace in return. The sun, a great bleeding ball of fire, sinks towards the horizon. Its light paints the undersides of the clouds in fiery streaks of crimson and gold, a spectacular, dramatic display that reminds you, just for a moment, of the lantern-lit hall of the temple. You remember the warlord, a figure now so distant he seems like a character from a half-forgotten play. A man who built a fortress of power on a foundation of lies, only to find it had no floor. He died, they said, haunted by a ghost. But you know better. He wasn't haunted by a ghost. He was haunted by the truth. A truth that was quiet and patient, and had all the time in the world. It had simply waited for his lies to collapse under their own weight. You feel no triumph in the memory, no satisfaction. Only a profound, weary sadness for a man who choked on his own pride. Your gaze drifts eastward, across the darkening water, toward the place where the cliff temple stands. You have never returned. You never will. But you think of it now, not with fear, but with a quiet reverence. You think of your cousin, Tadakatsu. You wonder if he lived a long life, if he found happiness, if he ever knew the outcome of the seeds you planted together. You send a silent thanks across the water to him, a debt of loyalty you could never repay, a bond of blood that had reached across a sea of trouble to pull you to shore. And you think of Nobu. His memory is not a ghost that haunts you anymore. It is a presence. It is the steady, deep note that resonates beneath the lighter melody of your daily life. It is the quiet integrity in the heart of the village. It is the measure against which you have judged your every action since that terrible night. The truth has no author. It simply is. Asterisk. How many times have those words echoed in your mind? He was right. You did not create the truth about the warlord. You merely gave it a voice. A reckless, clumsy, self-serving voice, perhaps, but a voice nonetheless. Nobu did something far braver. He gave the truth his silence. In a world of noise and lies, his refusal to speak, his refusal to ring that bell, was the loudest, clearest proclamation of all. You had spent years trying to be worthy of his sacrifice, trying to build a life of service that might somehow balance the scales. But you see now, in the fading light of your own long life, that the scales can never be balanced. That was never the point. You cannot repay such a debt, you can only honor it. You can only live a life that proves his sacrifice was not in vain. Looking down at the peaceful village, at the families safe in their homes, at the legacy of quiet kindness you have tried to build, you desperately hope, you have come close. The fiery colors of the sunset begin to soften. The brilliant oranges and scarlets melt into gentler shades of lavender and rose. The sea turns from molten gold to a deep, placid purple. The drama is over. The quiet begins. And in this gentle transition you find the shape of your own life. You were Tomi, a man of bright, flashy, and often false colors. A man of the loud marketplace and the grand, deceitful gesture. Then came the fire, the fear, the flight. But the twilight years, the long, quiet decades as Umiko, have been the most real. Here, in the soft, fading light, you have done your most honest work. You have learned that a lie can be a cage, but it can also, paradoxically, be a chrysalis. Trapped inside the false identity of Umiko, the man named Tommy had no choice but to transform, to shed his gaudy wings and grow into something simpler, stronger, and more true. Peace, you reflect, is not a destination you arrive at. It is not the absence of struggle or the forgetting of pain. It is the quiet acceptance of all of it. It is the ability to sit on a cliff and look back on the whole tumultuous sea of your life, the deceit and the honesty, the cowardice and the courage, the terrible cost and the precious reward, and see it not as a storm of chaos, but as a single coherent story. Your story. You are the man who ran, and the man who stayed. You are the man who lied, and the man who learned the weight of truth. You are the man who was saved, and the man who spent a lifetime honoring the Savior he could never thank. The last sliver of the sun disappears below the horizon, and the first star pricks the veil of twilight. A deep, profound stillness settles over the world. The roar of the surf below is no longer a sound of turmoil, but a slow, steady breath. The breath of the world. The breath of time. You close your eyes, and you feel it. Not a grand victory, not a triumphant absolution, but a quiet, unassuming sense of peace, as gentle and pervasive as the cool night air. It has taken you a lifetime to find it, and it was here, waiting for you all along. And so our journey ends, not with the clash of swords or the fall of castles, but here, in the quiet company of an old man on a cliff, watching the stars come out. Peace, as Tommy learned, is rarely found in the thunder of a great victory, or the loud celebration that follows. Those moments are fleeting, like the fiery colors of the sunset. True peace, the kind that settles deep in your bones, is often found in the quiet twilight that follows. It is found in the gentle acceptance of who we are, of the choices we have made, and of the complex, beautiful, and sometimes sorrowful stories that make us. As you lie here now, on the edge of sleep, perhaps you can find your own cliff of reflection. Think of the stories that have shaped you, the people you have touched, and the people who have touched you, the moments of turmoil and the quiet moments of grace. We all have them. We are all, in our own way, a collection of the tales we have lived. So let the rhythm of the waves, the quiet hum of the world outside your window, be your own song of peace tonight. Let go of the day's battles, the loud victories, and the quiet defeats. Let your mind drift on the tide, like the small wooden bell Tommy sent out to sea, a silent testament to a journey completed. May your dreams be gentle harbors, and may you wake tomorrow with a renewed appreciation for the small, quiet, and profound moments of peace that wait for you every single day. Good night.